released our first issue way back in fall of 2017 at the Phoenix Zine Fest, that second year that they ran it.
I'm wondering if I was there. I was like in the back recording people's experiences at one of them if they wanted to go back there and talk about it.
So that's awesome.
Didn't really get to go and see a lot of the stuff that was going on because I was in the back the whole time, over by the cut paste station and all that kind of thing.
Okay,
So we might have been at the same thing.
Yeah,
it's possible, very possible.
Yeah, Zine Fest is a good time, and I think we sort of set that as our target when we started doing the first. We wanted to specifically do something for Zine Fest, and after that, we kept going and had already, I think, built a couple of relationships, and kind of gotten to see what sort of the scale of what other people were doing and some of the possibilities out there.
And there's a really interesting range of aesthetics, from the very like DIY stapled sort of thing to, some stuff like, I thought this was pretty impressive when I got a copy of it. It's like a perfect bound kind of deal. Looks like a journal, like you would find, on
we're about
anywhere.
Half and half between a journal and a zine, I think. And I think we have sort of these zine origins, but even right from the beginning, we worked really hard to make it look clean and readable and a little further away from the DIY aesthetic.
Yeah.
But I think our mindset of how we piece together each issue and what goes in and how we see these issues coming together as a whole is still very influenced by the zine conception of putting out a piece of work into the world.
Now I started writing at the end, at the present here, and I really want to go back to the beginning. So how you mentioned that so had you gone to the first Zine Fest and that was kind of like you guys thought maybe you would do something for the next one, or it was just, how did this whole concept come together other than the idea that you wanted to do something for Zine Fest?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different parts to that. I went to the first Zine Fest, but I didn't think that I could even make a zine really until, like, I didn't conceptualize that possibility until maybe spring of 2017. So a few months before the Zine Fest. But it was a really inspiring time, and I think there was a lot of inspiration from political sphere, all the turmoil of the election, and also a lot of
what you're talking about. I blacked out for a deep period of depression. That's about it.
Decent strategy.
And then lots of other things too. I think people like becoming more creative in their lives. For me, that was one impetus. People coming together, like Andrew joining. I think about that time, spring. He came to Arizona.
I was around in August.
Oh, really?
Of 2017 was when I moved to Phoenix from the Bay, and
just after the Zine Fest.
Yeah. Or no, I think Zine
right
Fest
before, but maybe you weren't integrated. It was in October, actually.
Yeah, and so it came together pretty quickly after that, and it was like a real fast turnaround. And I met Josh and most of our others, our original group, through DSA, and they had a notion to make try to fill a void, or maybe not a void, but like a place where we thought we could contribute for an Arizona specific, a desert specific publication of radical and specifically anti-capitalist and socialist thinking. So that was our sort of original notion, and we wanted to just sort of put out an imaginative work, especially at a time when it seemed like things were so bad, but also there were so many possibilities. And And so our first issue was very much very open in that way, and full of people doing kind of taking the world around them or some of the concepts they'd been fed and turning them around. But it also ended up being pretty critical in its nature. We wanted to approach it from this imagine a better skyline position, but we also in the process ended up writing pieces that I think were sort of very broadly about critiquing modern life and the spaces that we end up living in, particularly in Arizona and Phoenix and in deserts kind of generally.
Well, there's certainly a lot to critique living or trying to carve this extraordinarily capitalist centric and this is the least sustainable city in the country, pretty much. We're not meant to live here, and yet we persist and build these giant monuments up to something that really wants to kill us. So it's a little
that was really, I think that's a really important point, which is I remember a little bit about like how we generate the work is we often will just meet and have discussions about things that we're thinking about, or like things that we want to create, or like things that we'd like to critique, or personal experiences that eventually get melded into the pieces that get integrated into the issue. But yeah, that point that you just made very specifically, I remember during the initial conversations where we were all just hanging out, talking about Phoenix in particular, this sort of like amazement, both bewilderment and sort of disdain, and also like hope, all together at the like weird fact of Phoenix existing and so many people living here, right? Like the sheer fact that this can exist, right? Like, can't something better exist that like serves people equitably, or like doesn't put people behind, or doesn't, forget about people that have been marginalized or things like this, right? I just really resonate with that, what you were talking about, and I think it like was really centered at the first issue that we put out.
Yeah, we saw, I think, in the previous Zine Fest, those who had gone, I wasn't there, but got a sense that Arizona has a lot of amazing zine artists and creators, and a lot of fantastic work that is like feminist zines and queer zines and various sort of adjacent radical thinking and critiques. But there wasn't, I think, one that occupied our specific sort of ideological interests, and so that was why we thought we could contribute, and it just became a really interesting project, right? And we sort of found in that first couple issues a sense of that there's something to explore here that there hasn't been a lot, even sort of in the world more broadly, a lot of thinking and writing about what it means to have radical politics in the desert and in a place like Arizona, and what these, and bringing those lenses to view on this particular place and way of being. And we kind of tapped into, I don't know, like if you look at the first page, the letter to the editors, right, at the beginning of each issue, and then the final page, those sort of we've been building out a landscape of metaphors of that tie into the theme of each issue, but also tie into this sense of trudging through a desert, or thriving in a desert, or somehow occupying this particular kind of space. And I think the sense that that's something that there's a lot we can do with that, and that every issue we can sort of iterate on that and find something new to say, is part of why we've can just want to keep this project going, and why other people have been drawn to it as well and wanted to join us because there is something interesting to explore.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I have so the first issue was that all of you wrote pieces for it who were also just creating it, making it. At what point did you sort of branch out, or have you branched out much into people contributing outside of the initial collective?
I think our first 2 issues were pretty much filled almost entirely by folks that I guess are a part of our editorial group. And then starting with the 3rd issue and kind of going back and forth a little bit since we opened it up to submissions that we've taken online. In our recent issue, we started using some of the online tools to sort of put our call for submissions out there. And so we've been working to try and find kind of the right register between how much of the issue we produce as a collective in terms of the copy and how much we solicit and curate and from outside, from people who may not be who may not know us or who may not even have a full sense of the scope of our project, but who want to contribute.
Well, how do people, I mean, you guys have a website, you have a Facebook page, you have a presence, certainly, but how do people come to you guys, or become familiar with your work to the point where, and, you know, I have a publishing wing of what I do, and I know that 99% of the people that have submitted manuscripts have not read a single book that we've published. So it can be, which, you know, to be honest, is why so many things end up getting rejected out of hand, because they have no idea what we're looking for. But so how do people kind of become familiar with you? Or is it the similar sort of thing? And they're like, oh, I'm going to like send my manifesto to these guys.
I think there's a bit of a balance there. Yeah. Like Andrew said, I think the first 2 issues were all of like the core people, I would say, that are involved in like editing and typesetting and binding. And then those what I would say are like maybe external submissions come from mostly people that we know. So it would be like our friends or people from out of state that.
So people who would know what you guys were about and the sort of writing that you
maybe
do.
They're like sympathetic and we've shared work with them, or other local artists that we've met at tabling events, like the Zine Fest, or know through other networks. And then, with this most recent issue, we did use we got more submissions from people who were not familiar with us. And I would say it was about
through Duotrope, I think, and we used Submissions Grinder, and maybe we had a submittable as well, and got something like that. But our calls were also pretty specific, and I know, I mean, I'm a writer who uses those services to submit myself, and so I send things to plenty of publications that I've never read a copy of.
Yeah,
you just sort of have to. But our calls were pretty specific about kind of our critical lens and you know, have like Marcuse quotes in them, and these sorts of things that I think help people situate and decide whether or not it's worth sending us stuff. But and then it's a matter of, you know, we get a bunch of things and we give them a read and we start to see if any of those pieces can fit into the broader metaphorical sort of, I guess, sort of area of interest that we're exploring in a given issue.
Yeah, I would say I would be curious to talk more about that with like your experiences, and how, like what you do to find people to submit.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that it's probably, you know, what we were just talking about, you know, there's I think people kind of troll